Well, hey there, I'm Pastor Seth Williamson, the lead pastor of Church of the Ascension here in McKinney, Texas. I want to thank you so much for tuning in once again to listen to our podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how church plants reach people. Last week, we talked about why you should join a church plant, which is basically kind of boiled down to church plants are a really great place for you to grow in your faith. So now we'll start to talk about how church startups effectively reach people for Jesus. First, let me start by talking about what is a church plant exactly. I use that word, and not everyone knows what that means. Not everyone is familiar with that term. And really, it's just sort of a catchy way to talk about the starting of new congregations, right? I'm sure there was some very planned rollout of that word at some point. But when you get into sort of the church multiplication world and start talking about, okay, how is it exactly that we start more churches? How do we grow churches? How do we get people to go out and start churches that succeed? That's the church planting world we're talking about. So you can say church startup, you can say new churches, anything like that. But when we talk about church plant, that's what we mean. Now, the reason I'm starting to talk about that, first off, is just for your own, so you know what I'm talking about. But furthermore, I just used a phrase that Christians use, right? That's a pretty common word that's used around the church, especially these days. It didn't always used to be a very popular term. It used to be a niche sort of term that was used back in the day. But now it's a little more in popular parlance. But it's still a Christian word. And it sort of may have confused you for a moment. Okay, what does that mean when he says that? That is kind of how people who aren't church feel about everything in our faith. For those of us who have grown up in the church, it's really hard to put ourselves in the shoes of those who have no church background. Even when it comes to leading people to Christ, we are sort of put in an environment where maybe you're going to Sunday school class, maybe you're at a Christian school, you're in a Christian family, and so this Jesus stuff is just kind of in the air. And we're all talking about Jesus, and then one day someone says, okay, so now you've heard about all this, do you want to accept Jesus? And so it becomes very, very hard for those of us who are deep in our faith and sort of more advanced in our faith to then go and try to relate to people who have no background in Christianity whatsoever. I mean, think about it this way. Imagine you're driving down the street and you pass a mosque or a Hindu temple. You might say, what a pretty building. That's a nice building. But you'd never go inside. And in fact, the idea of going inside would probably make you feel very uncomfortable. And you would be like, no way, I'm not going in there. I'm not going to go into that place. So you got to put yourself in their perspective, right? That they don't know what you're talking about. They don't see how it's relevant to them, right? It's not that they think Christianity is bad. It's just they don't know why they should be involved in it and how it has anything to do with them, right? So it's really important for us to put ourselves in that framework. And as we talk today about why church plants are so stinking good at reaching the unchurched, just keep that sort of attitude the entire time. If your church gets good at evangelism, if you get good at reaching your community for Jesus, you're going to have a lot of people come in there with some wild beliefs that are acting all kinds of way. Okay, I was involved in a church at one point. I'm not going to say the name of the church, but there's a pastor of this church who was working with the youth, and he got really, really good at reaching our community. The church was built in a neighborhood that at one point was like a middle-class white neighborhood, starter homes for young white families, professionals, both blue and white collar. And so that community built that church. As they sort of rose economically, that church rose economically with that generation. It's over a century-old church. over time, all those people moved out into the countryside into bigger houses as they got wealthier. And the people who moved into that neighborhood after them were not more white startup families. It was mostly black families, single mother households, that sort of thing, minority households. And so people would commute to this church, and those who were in the neighborhood would never come to this church. So there was a disconnect between the church and the community. Well, this particular pastor got very good at reaching that divide, and we began to see lots of people from our community actually come into the church. The problem was they were not very well behaved. They were kind of rough around the edges. They didn't know how to talk like a Christian. They didn't dress like a Christian. They didn't act like our kids or look like our kids, and people were just offended by their behavior. They were used to kids who were raised in two-parent households and taught to be polite, and have gone to church since they were in diapers. When you take someone who's just a person of the world, from a rough neighborhood, and you stick them in a church full of very well-behaved people, there's going to be some conflict. So that pastor got in trouble, and it caused a lot of conflict. He eventually left that church. But we have to think about that. We have to think about the fact that church plants are going to be full of a lot of people who don't know anything about Jesus, don't know how to act at all in church, and they're learning all this for the first time. Here's the beauty of that. You get to be reminded how awesome our faith is. Because when you've been doing it for decades, and someone's just doing it for the first time, you get to re-experience what it was like to do it for the first time and why you love it so much. So there's sort of a symbiosis that goes on. We bring them the faith once handed down, and we teach them about Jesus, and then they bring us that excitement as we see them experiencing Jesus. So just think about all that as we go through this. So there's three things that I want to talk about as far as this goes, okay? So I want to first talk about conversion rates, annual conversion rates, as well as the attitude that church plants have. I also want to talk about sort of bringing people. Part of our mission statement at Church of the Ascension is to bring all people into the fullness of life. And so talking about just relationship, building trust, and creating an imagination for people. And then I want to finish by talking some more about seeing the world through their eyes. Let's talk about conversion rate. So when you have a church that is 5 years or younger, so a startup church, a church plant, you will see one person come to Christ every year for every 3 members that church has. So if they have 6 members, they're going to bring 2 people to Christ every single year. Okay. Churches that are 10 years or older bring 1 person to Christ for every 89 members they have. So in order to bring 2 people to Christ, they got to have whatever 89 times 2 is. I'm not great at math. But it's a lot more than 6 people. So a church plant with 89 people in it can reach a lot more people than an established church with 89 people in it. So that's pretty incredible. The rate at which church plants are actually able to reach people for Jesus is incredible. Now, I've also heard it said that the average attendance, average membership of a church plant, it's about 42% of their membership are people who were not churched less than 1 year ago. So all half new Christians is what you're looking at. Now that'd be really exciting. If your church, all of a sudden half of it was new Christians, you'd say, wow, we must be doing something really good because everyone in our community is finding Jesus and we're talking about Jesus and all that kind of stuff. So there'd be a lot of excitement around that. But it just gets tough as you become less of a movement, more of an institution. And that's sort of the natural life cycle of a church. To look at a church and say it's bad because it's an institution is sort of nonsense to me. It's just gobbledygook. Something's not bad because it is an institution. Institutions are necessary. We have to be able to organize and cooperate and work together. And also, if you're someone who's donating money to a church, you want to make sure that money is being handled properly. And so in institutions, the best way to make sure finances aren't being wasted. Movements kind of need to make some mistakes, and so there's some more grace there. They might spend some money on something like this. You go, oh, that wasn't the best thing to spend our money on, but we did our best. didn't result in the fruit we want it to. But then on the other side, institutions slow down movements. Okay, institutions naturally make things go slower. So there's a trade-off, right? As a church gets older, and this is why normal, healthy churches should always be involved in planting new churches, because eventually your church, it's just like life, right? When you're young and you're in your 20s and you have a bunch of little kids running all over the place, you have the energy to chase 2-year-olds around. But then when you get into your 40s and you have teenagers, and then you look at 2-year-olds, you go, man, they look exhausting. I don't know how to even deal with a 2-year-old anymore. I mean, they're cute and I like them, but I'm now here with teenagers. So everything is a life cycle. Anything made up with humans ages. And as it ages, it just changes. And so there's nothing wrong with it. We have to get out of this mentality of looking at churches and say, well, they're too big, so they're bad, or they're an institution, so they're bad, or they're too small, so they're bad, or they're too hip or young, so they're bad. And looking at all these Christians who are simply trying their best to bring the message of Jesus to their communities and sort of judging them because of nothing that has anything to do with faith, right? If there's a church out there saying Jesus isn't God, okay, that would be a problem no matter who they are, right? But if they're abiding by the faith once handed down, we have to say, yeah, just like you need old people and young people, you need established churches and church plants. It's just kind of the way things go. But we have to recognize that what church plants bring to the table is a certain attitude. When you look around a room and it's just like 50 of you or 25 of you, you begin to say, we need to make this place fill up. We need to grow this place. And so there's sort of an urgency that you can see with your own eyes. When you walk into an established church and there's a building and there's staff and there's payroll and there's all this kind of stuff and there's hundreds of people there every single Sunday, you feel less of an urgency to go out there and fill it up. Because part of a church plant success, pardon me, my cat's making an appearance. Part of a church plant success is actually its ability to go out and spread the word. And so at our church plant, we talk about I use the word unchurched a lot, but really you're looking for 3 types of people when it comes to multiplication. You're looking for the unchurched, the de-churched, and the lightly churched. This is my cat, Lewis. You might not be able to see him, but he's on my lap. So what are the unchurched? Well, the unchurched are people who have never been to church in their life. They're not going to church. They have no Christian upbringing or anything like that. So that's what an unchurched person is. The de-churched are those who used to go to church but have left. And there's lots of reasons you can leave church. It's not all bad. Some of them are just, maybe you had kids, you moved away, you got sick, a tragedy happened, maybe you had a bad church, but those are folks who at one point were in the church and have left it. The third category, the lightly churched, and those are folks who went to church a little bit. Okay, these are people who maybe went to church on like Christmas and Easter. They've been to churches for funerals and weddings, and maybe they went to VBS growing up. So they have a little bit of church, but they're not really Christians or very devoted, anything like that. So when you look at that, you go, okay, so I'm trying to find folks who have no church experience, those who have left the church, and those who have a little bit of church experience. And we're trying to make them into people who are faithful followers of Jesus and his church. That's what we're doing as a church plant. And so if everyone would sit down, you could do this yourself, sit down, pull out a piece of paper, and write down the names of 5 people who would fall into that category, unchurched, de-churched, lightly churched, in your area. And if you commit to pray for them and begin to bless them, which is, begin with prayer, listen to them, eat with them, serve them, and share your story. If you would commit to doing that, then you would see that, hey, I'm actually able to make a big difference in this. The good thing about a church plant is everyone in the environment's doing it. So all of us are doing it together. You're not doing it by yourself. You're getting feedback and tips, and we're all really focused on this task. That's another thing, is that church plants provide focus for evangelism, whereas a lot of churches have a lot of different things going on. So we just see there's a lot of advantages of being part of a church plant when it comes to conversion rates. Let's talk about the other thing, is that the way a church plant goes about doing evangelism is hopefully very intentional. Okay, so When I was in high school and I got called to ministry, I was very enthusiastic about evangelism. I would go into college campuses, go to fairs, go to parks, and I would do street evangelism. I would stop folks and tell them about Jesus. And it was very gratifying for me because I instantly got to just tell you about Jesus. I was like, all right, check the box. I've done it. And by the way, this used to be very effective. Okay. Me doing this podcast and just putting it out on the internet is basically like standing on a street corner. Anyone who happens to pass by and hears me is going to catch a little bit of my message. So it's not that we don't do this anymore, it's just the venue has changed. So back in the day, that was actually very effective. Billy Graham used to be a street preacher and had led many people to Christ from standing on a soapbox in the middle of the street. Here's the problem, though, is that today it's not very effective. And so I would talk to these people and maybe they'd pray the sinner's prayer or whatever to get me to leave them alone. But I'd never see them come to church. They wouldn't become disciples. They wouldn't get baptized. I would never know anything else about them. So it was really more about me than it was about them. Now that I'm a pastor and I've been trained some more, what I realize is we have to focus on the other person first. And that's why relational evangelism is so effective. And that's why we talk about bringing people into the fullness of life. Bringing sort of implies that it's going to take a little bit of time. You're going to have to walk with them for a while through highs and lows, through their doubts and questions and hurts and their anger. You're going to have to sort of help them navigate church and the Christian life. And then when you finally get them to the point where they're ready to accept Christ, it doesn't end there. You still walk with them through discipleship as they are as a Christian and walking with Jesus. So that, I think, is a different posture towards evangelism that allows that person to listen to the Holy Spirit. And really not just that, but it's not just about the gospel. It's also about the church. There are a lot of people out there who say, the gospel sounds great to me. I love Jesus' teachings, but I don't like the church. And here's the problem with that. You in your heart sort of think that you're in a different category than everybody else. Going to a church full of people that you might find a little odd and unpleasant sort of says a lot about you, right? Maybe there are people out there who think you are odd and unpleasant, right? And so we have to show people the church. For them to really grow in their faith, they have to be involved in the church. And the church is Christ's bride. So that's kind of the destination for them to begin to grow in their faith because we want them to reproduce, right? Don't just, okay, I'm good. I've gotten my fire insurance and I'm just going to go and you guys, I don't really want to be involved with you guys, but I'm good now. Thank you for telling me about this. I feel good. I'm going to read my Bible by myself and I don't want to be involved. But being part of a church and part of a church plant, or whatever it is, gets you involved with other people. And that's how you begin to love God and love your neighbor. You can't love your neighbor if you have no neighbors, right? And remember what the lawyer said to Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, well, wouldn't you be happy if a Samaritan who you think's a dirtbag stopped and helped you, O noble Jew? Well, yeah, I would like that if he did that. Yeah, so that person at that church that you find very annoying, if you were broken down the side of the road or got into a car accident, if that annoying person from that church ran to the side of the road, ripped open your door, pulled you from the car, began to give CPR to you, called the police and the ambulance, and saved your life, how would you feel about that? Wouldn't you be happy that that person you find annoying treated you like their neighbor? That's the whole point. So you got to get involved in the church. But here's the thing. If you've never been to church, it's really intimidating. There's a lot of customs and culture and lingo that you don't know. And so what you got to do is you got to help them to see it. You got to give them an imagination. You got to help them picture themselves in that world. My wife and I are going to be going on vacation to Mexico, which is what you do when you live in Texas. And I used to be very opposed to this idea. To me, I'll go look on the news, and Mexico seems very dangerous. And I don't know if it's safe to go there. And I hear you can't drink the water or it makes you sick. So why am I going to Mexico if it scares me? Well, here's the reason why. A bunch of our friends have already been and have told me this is what it's like. And so instead of imagining the cartel kidnapping me or like sitting on the toilet being sick for 3 days. I began to imagine all the positive and wonderful things about going down to that part of the world. And I said to myself, maybe I judged them too quickly. Maybe I was wrong. And maybe I actually want to go and try it. The same thing happens to the church. They're going to be imagining a bunch of like old judgmental people who are mean and they don't like science or technology, and they're just all in like there's like a priest that's like a child predator or something like that, and they have all these horrible negative things in their mind that they're imagining for the church. But as you begin to sort of share with them your experiences and show them a church is healthy, right? Hopefully your church is healthy, right? It's kind of hard to do evangelism if your church is not a healthy place. Again, church plants are great for this because we're all really ready to receive people who are unbelievers. So when you come and show them a healthy church, they all of a sudden they go, maybe I was wrong about church. Maybe church is actually really helpful, and I'm actually making friends, and everyone is really, really nice, and they care about my community, and I want to be involved in this. And you may find folks that actually like church way before they want to become a Christian. They just like being there and being in the midst of that. So that's the sort of the power of having that kind of environment set up. All right, last thing I want to talk about is seeing the world through their eyes. And this is kind of in the theme that's kind of run throughout this entire episode. You have to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's not a church person. First off, I want you to imagine all the wonderful things Christ has done for you in your life. Think about all the times where Christ has brought you peace and hope and joy, where you've been loved and you've been assisted by the church. When my daughter was born early, our church saved our lives. Growing up, our church, my dad was involved as a deacon in the church, was mowing the lawns of widows. Just so many things that the church has done for you. Imagine that. Now imagine it's just gone. What would your life have been like without it? Okay, so there are folks out there who they don't believe in Christianity. Not because they're dumb, not because they're any worse than you are, but because no one has ever taken the time to really explain it to them and to sort of deal with their objections and has had the patience to deal with their objections. And they don't know at all you just think, they are probably having the same sort of experience in life that I'm experiencing. They're not. Unless Jesus isn't real and the Holy Spirit isn't real, then they're not. I have a good friend who I've probably mentioned before on here, but he's considering becoming a priest. And he became a Christian when he was an adult. So he didn't grow up in a Christian home. They went to a very liberal church growing up. They didn't really preach the gospel or the Bible. They just kind of talked about politics. And so he was like, well, we can get politics at home. Why are we waking up early on Sunday morning to come here? And his family stopped going to church. And so he eventually later in life became a Christian. And and he will tell you immediately, there is a difference when you come to Christ. Right? There's a difference when you come to Christ. And so we have to remember, wow, we have an amazing gift. We have good news that can make people happy and free. We really do. And so we have to have patience with people. They're going to come into our church and they're going to say a bunch of weird stuff. And we're going to say, well, you didn't say it quite right. You're not acting quite right, so you don't pass the Christian test. No, they're just a little baby Christian. And they're saved by God's grace, not by performing. So you have to be willing to let them slip up. You have to be able to answer simple questions like, when you open up your Bible, the big number are the chapters and the little numbers are the verses. They don't know what order anything goes in. They don't know New Testament, Old Testament, Greek, Hebrew, Israel, the church. They don't know any of this stuff because no one's ever taught it to them. Everything you know about Jesus was taught to you by somebody. Everything. And if you don't teach it to someone else, it'll just get lost. I don't remember when I learned the Lord's Prayer. I just kind of know it. And I don't really remember when I learned John 3:16. I just kind of know it. And there's a lot of stuff about church that for those of us who grew up in the church, we just kind of know. And so that can deceive us. We go, yeah, this is kind of common knowledge. No, it's not. No, it's not. And studies show us, even within the church, it's not common knowledge. Even within the church, it's just not common knowledge. And so you have to be willing to do what someone else did for you, and that is take the time to teach them, to be patient with them, and to think to yourself, if I wasn't a Christian, would I be interested in this at all? Like, for example, if your church did a class on prayer and opened it to the public, would a lot of people come to that? Or what if you did a seminar on public safety, like how to keep our community safe, and you open it to the public and you hosted it as the church? I think a lot more people would come to that. And it's not like those two things are opposed. As the church, you want to see the community to be safe because that means everyone is flourishing. But you got to find a way, okay, if I wasn't a Christian, would this make sense to me? Would this appeal to me? We're not saying to throw out the gospel. What we're saying is we got to speak their language. You got to put yourself in their shoes and try to see the world through their eyes. So this is the kind of stuff that excites me at Church of the Ascension. That really is what we're all about. We know that we have the greatest gift that God has ever given us through his grace. And we want to give that gift away. We want to invite people into this amazing process of actually going out there and sharing our faith and blessing our community. Whether or not they join our church, we want to bless people in the name of Jesus because that's what he wants us to do. God is love, and we want to walk in love as Christ has loved us. If you're interested in being part of a church that goes out and actually reaches the unchurched and focuses on our community, as opposed to just us, the church, then you might want to be part of our church. You can check out our website or social media and reach out to me to schedule an in-person or online meeting to talk more about the church. Until then, we'll see you next time.